Welcome to the Badass Dad podcast, where we are a band of brothers committed to forging stronger fathers. Hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode. This is being brought to you by the generous donations of the people who have made contributions at our website, which is BadAssDads.org, BadAssDads.org. You can also find some promotional shirts and other ways to support the podcast as well. But just want to thank you guys so much for your support. Enjoy this episode. Welcome to the BadAss Dad podcast. KDH here on the microphone in the IronYetiStudios with the new tables, the new gear, the new swag. Steven DeShriver just taking it up a notch, and so very, very excited about that. And across the table from me today is JT Anderson. JT, how you feeling?
Oh, I'm doing great. I really am.
Yeah, man. I tell you what, I'm so excited about getting to sit across the table from you and getting you on the microphone. I don't know. We've known each other a handful of years.
Yeah, I'd say close to 10, honestly.
10 years. Okay. And, kind of met a few times, crossed paths in at the gym, just different things. And, man, I've just, as I've thought about you, the one word that has come to my mind over and over and over again is just an encourager, man. You have such a great spirit about you that just makes me feel good. Just like when I see you, I feel better about myself when I see you. So has that always been the case? Or is that just natural, something you were born with growing up in the Midwest?
It's funny that you bring that up. I had a aunt when I was about 12 years old, and she told my mother that I was a Barnabas, and I really didn't know much about the Bible at that time. I don't think she did either. And my pastor recently said the same thing. And so I would say that is the highest honor somebody can give you, me at least, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's who you are. It just seems so natural, so much a part of your character. And so I just wanted to thank you for that. So, you've heard a few episodes. We've talked a little bit, you kind of have a little bit of idea where we started from back in the day, a couple years ago with Badass Dads. And just we want to hear your story just to start with. So tell us about little JT growing up in the Midwest and then moving out here to Colorado. Tell us your story a little bit.
Well, back in the day, I was known as Jimmy Anderson.
Okay.
My dad was James, or they called him Big Jim. My father his dad was a police officer, and they called him Andy, Arnold Anderson, but he was known as Police Officer Andy. So I took on the persona as Jimmy Anderson, and I was a fairly slight, slender kid. I was athletic, but I certainly didn't walk in the room and people got out of my way. So as I got older, I started doing more lifting and things like that, and I had a very dear friend of mine that nicknamed me JT, and that kind of stuck with me from high school all the way to the present day now. Growing up, it was always a situation, I think, as young men, you always wanted to prove yourself. And the name Jimmy always had a connotation of being kind of a wimpy name.
Okay.
And so JT is something, I guess, I don't know, I hold my head up a little bit higher, I suppose.
Yeah. And so your parents growing up, your dad was in law enforcement.
It was my grandfather.
Oh, your grandfather.
Yes,
okay.
My father was in pharmaceuticals and worked his way up from just a salesperson to a sales director to a national salesman, and very proud of him and what he's accomplished. And my mother had worked for a period of time in her life, and then she stayed at home with my sister and myself.
Okay. And you spent, more than 2 decades now as a chiropractor and in the healthcare profession. I love that story you were telling me earlier, kind of what led you into it. So even from your early teen years, so tell us that story just about how you kind of got to where you are now from a professional standpoint.
When I was about 13, we all played sandlot football or baseball, and I remember always having just a little bit of a anxious back, a lower back that didn't quite always feel right to me. And I remember being a quarterback on one of our little pickup games, and I threw a big bomb to a guy running down the sidelines, and my right lower back gave out on me like somebody shot me. And I had to have a couple buddies of mine take me home, tell my mom what happened. We never really gave it much of a thought for about a week and a half. I just did the simple ancillary things like ibuprofen and heat and ice and just massage and just give it some rest. And a couple weeks after that, I went ahead and did the same thing on the same sandlot, and we knew something was wrong. So we got myself a water bed, and we tried some other things, some physical therapy. But I had a buddy of mine I went to school with. He was about 2-3 years older than me, and he started doing a lot of lifting, and he encouraged me to start training my body up since I was kind of a slight, slender kid. I remember doing a bench press on one of those little DPS dumbbell sets, and we had about 60 pounds on there, and the first time I unracked the weight, boom, it went right down to my chest.
Yeah.
I was so embarrassed, and so we lightened the weight down until about 50 pounds. I was able to finally get one repetition. I knew at that point I wanted to start lifting. So we had a facility called the Nautilus Fitness Center, and I would go to and from after school, riding my bike to the Nautilus Fitness Center for 2 to 3 hours, came back, and I started gaining some pretty significant muscle. Joined the Junior Olympics when I was 15 years old. But I knew at that point that I really had to build a good core for my lower back in order to withstand some of the storms that came at me.
So Junior Olympics, I mean, tell us about that. That had to have been kind of fun.
It was very interesting.
Yeah.
So 8th grade year, we had I remember just a monster of a teacher, a physical education teacher that recruited a few of us and a couple of females as well. And we participated in the bench press and the deadlift and the squat. And both the squat and the deadlift were my strong points, whereas the bench press was my weakest. So we basically competed. And some of them went on to bigger and better things, and I tried my luck into some boxing and some other different options. But I think bodybuilding was something that really was more of what my calling was. And so I did a few different shows. I kind of got rid of some of the heavier mass and went into more flexibility and more of a bodybuilding look. And so I didn't do any more of the powerlifting per se.
Yeah. Well, tell the story also, though, how you ended up meeting someone in that world who could have been very well known, you know, on big stages as well. And then some of the things that he was able to notice in your body, and then really what's kind of led you to chiropractic, you know, profession. So
when I moved to Southern California, it was a wonderful time to move out there when I was a freshman, you know, big eyes and ready to rock and roll. It was a Colorado kid moving out to Southern California.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I walked out on the baseball field, the kids would say, do you ride horses to school every day? You know, I was totally out of my element. But I was bigger back then because I was lifting, and so they didn't give me too much grief. And so I joined a phenomenal gym in Lake Forest, California called Superflex. And Kalman Skalak had won Mr. Universe 3 years earlier. And he had a lot of different personalities that came through that door.
So you just happened to walk into Mr. Universe's, I mean, how amazing is that?
So, you know,
like, did you know who he was when you walked in, or was that?
No, I really had no clue. But there was posters and billboards everywhere. And I remember we lived about 15 miles away, and I would have to take the bus about 2 miles away, and I'd take a skateboard, and I was terrible at skateboarding. So many scrapes and bruises that I would fall off the skateboard, but I would ride all the way down. And of course, when I was done at the gym, I'd have to scoot myself all the way back, take the bus back and forth. Did that for a couple of years till I finally got my driver's license. But during that time, I had a lot of mentors that really kind of came alongside of me. And one particular was a sports chiropractor. And he noticed that I had some really odd forms with squatting and some of the other lifting. And so he took me aside and asked me if I had lower back pain. And I said, I've had a history of it. I've been able to ward it off through some of the lifting, but every now and then it seizes up on me. So he took me under his wing. Didn't want to tell my parents that I was interested in going to a chiropractor because I knew they would probably shut it down. So under the gun, basically under the sly, I went and saw him for about 6 weeks, and we started analyzing through x-rays and through other testing that I really did have some congenital issues that needed to be addressed, not only then, but for the rest of my life. And through that course of time, that experience, finally telling my parents where I had been going, I realized that I wanted to be a chiropractor.
Wow. So you kind of jump into that, becoming more just a life mission for you, it seems like, because you've been doing it now for so long. And somewhere along the lines, you meet Bethany. So tell us, how did you guys meet? So your wife, Bethany.
So we were up in northern Colorado, and I had been working for a phenomenal gym up there. And she was this cute little redhead that was doing all of these different dance shows that she was getting ready for, and I remember just kind of peering into this aerobics room and noticing her. She just caught my eye.
Yeah.
Well, she was very strong, and I bumped into her a few times. We actually took one class together, and she was a little bit standoffish. She was paying her way through college, being a residence assistant, an RA. She didn't really have time for a relationship.
Sure.
It was the hardest fish, technically, that I ever had to catch. But we've been married now, this coming up December 31st, 28 years. We have my son, Caden, and my daughter, Ellie. But she's been the rock, and without her, I don't know where I'd be.
So you guys, obviously you were married, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years before you guys had kids.
Yes.
As well. And so, Gretchen and I, we were married 14 years. No kids. And, before we adopted Jacob, our oldest. And so, I've looked back on that time and that experience and what a great blessing it was to us. One, to get to know each other. Also, to get our business and things going as well. How was that for you guys? Was that kind of how you planned it, or were there some hiccups there, or what?
Well, I would say there's definitely hiccups. When you're not walking with the Lord as a couple, I'll be straight out and honest with you, things are going to crumble. You're building a foundation on sandy ground. And my wife and I, we really enjoyed each other's company, but there was a lot of rough moments there. As I was going into chiropractic school, I was around all of these different elements that she wasn't around. She was kind of trying to make her way in her own little profession while she was supporting me going through school. And we found the Lord in Las Colinas Fellowship in Dallas, Texas, where I went to school. And, it wasn't as though the light just turned on and immediately our relationship was healed. But through the course of time, I think the Lord has used circumstances and so forth to bring us closer together. And I praise God for that, because I don't think we would be married for this long a period of time without the Lord as being that strong rock. And again, all I can say is that without the Lord leading our paths, who knows? We would have probably fallen into a lot of different temptations.
Yeah. Well, I've heard it said before, and probably most of us heard it said, you're either in the midst of a storm, heading into a storm, or coming out of a storm. And so, when you guys found yourself in the midst of that storm, what were some things that caused you to persevere? I mean, when it would be so easy just to tap out, in those moments.
I think before the storm got really rough and unbearable, there was a gentleman named Jim that he was an older gentleman that was on his second career chiropractic school. He took me under his wing, and both my wife and I went to our first For Him concert, and there was an altar call. My wife went up and gave her life to the Lord. I was a little standoffish, saying, "What are you doing? This is kind of weird. Why would you go up there?" Took me a little while to come alongside of her, but I really give a lot of credit to Jim as being one of those mentors in my life that kind of helped us weather that storm. He was the one that basically took us from kind of a desperate area in our lives, and he helped us through his wife understand we have to build our relationship on a rock as opposed to that sandy foundation.
Well, I love that. Now you've actually used the word 6 times now, whether you realize it or not. You used the word mentor 6 times in here, and you used it actually before when we were talking as well. And clearly that has been incredibly important in your life. And, for us, we talk about, Badass Dads is a band of brothers committed to forging stronger fathers. And, I think one of the challenges that we can have as dads is just the ability to say help, just ask for advice. But it sounds like you've been able to, throughout your entire life, really be able to reach out and find mentors, at different phases of life. And, if there's a guy out there that maybe doesn't have a mentor, doesn't have someone to walk alongside, how would you encourage them? What would be some things that they could do right now?
There's a great ministry out there called Fathers in the Field, and that's a phenomenal ministry that helps young men that don't have dads present in their lives. They recruit other fathers to kind of help them in the field of journey, and so that would be a great resource as Fathers in the Field. The other one is Tony Dungy has a phenomenal program that he rolls with as well. And I think, again, what you're doing here, Kevin, is just just right where we all need to be. We need to be encouraging each other. Proverbs 27 talks about iron sharpening iron. We get really dull very quickly. Even after one, slice, if you will, we have to resharpen that. And so every day, I would encourage all the dads to understand that you've got to look at it as being a journey, and it's a marathon and not a sprint.
I love that. Absolutely love that. So I want to hear the story of when you found out, when Bethany came to you and said, "Hey, JT, I'm with child." Tell me the story about when you found out you were going to be a dad for the first time.
Well, I think for me, life was going to change. I didn't know how much it was going to change, but I was very excited. I think after 8 years of marriage, we were ready to make that plunge, and we couldn't have been happier. I think for us, there wasn't any issues with any sickness or anything that would deter us from really understanding this is going to be a healthy child that we were going to bring into this world. We didn't wait. We found out it was going to be a boy, and so we planned ahead, and we were just super excited about it. And even though it was 19 years ago, it feels like yesterday when he came into the world.
And he's a senior now.
He's a senior.
And here we are, we're recording on today is March 19th, is that right? So March 19th, a little snowy day out in Colorado. March is our snowiest month of the year, but we're also right here in the early phases of the coronavirus pandemic and everybody on lockdown. And here he is 2 months away from graduating, and school's cut out, and he's missing all the senior things. Like, what are you guys doing to make this, this final year at home together, special? I mean, how is it for him?
Well, the first 3 quarters of his senior year, we were very excited about just everything going on. We've already planned his graduation party for Labor Day. We have 2 other families that committed. We've booked our reservations. We've already, got all of our announcements ready to rock and roll. And, in the last couple of weeks, we realized, wow, this is really something that may not even happen. Group gatherings of 10 or more, they're really trying to discourage and so forth. So I guess I would have to get back to you on what this looks like because it's so new to us. Honestly, Monday is the first day they start online schooling again. And so next week, I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about how that week went.
Yeah. And then you have Ellie, who's a junior as well. And so you've had a great experience to be able to walk through the phases of life. I was telling you earlier, I've got a 9-year-old, so I got a 3rd grader, and I have a 12, almost 13-year-old, 7th grader right now. And so they are definitely at different phases of life, but I'm now moving into that early adolescent phase. And so if you would just take a few moments and talk to us about, what it's like moving, just for me, just mentor me right now, just, moving into this next phase of adolescence and how the relationship with father and son, I don't have a daughter, but father and son begins to change, and, maybe some ideas that will help me to, navigate through these waters.
Well, in the Jewish culture, you have your bar mitzvah at 13, and the Catholic faith, of course, you have your confirmation. Well, as fathers, we really should look at our sons at 13 years old as being a great opportunity to knight him as becoming a man and educating him on what he can do as his journey progresses onward. And so we actually built a shield for him. It's really an incredible shield. It's got about 70 different puzzle pieces that he's basically been able to etch out his life from 13 on to this day. We've got about maybe 13 pieces left or so. But all of these things in the last 6 years have been leading up to this point. And so that would be something I would encourage. And then at 18 is another huge opportunity to, present him a gift as a manhood. And so I gave him a sword, kind of a gladiator sword.
I love it.
Proverbs 27, we talked about iron sharpening iron. So that would be something, I think, having these little markers that you can really look forward to.
Yeah, I love that. One of the ideas that I've been working with at least is, I call it stealing moments, so not taking, but stealing, like hardening these moments in our minds. And in, I just am imagining that ceremony of knighting your son and that being so steeled in their, so formed in their mind to go, I remember when my dad passed this on to me, and then on the 18th birthday, my dad, handing me, the sword. So much symbolism there, just streams through my consciousness right now. And, we'll see if it can actually happen now, but, we're working on an event called Forged, where we want to be able to take fathers and sons through a similar, structure and be able to take men out because, for me, I didn't grow up with the dad. And so some of these transitional things I didn't get a chance to experience. I was so fortunate that I had some amazing coaches, and I don't know that I was a good athlete, but I was good enough that, coaches at least knew who I was, that walked me through, so much of my adolescence as well, and some other fathers of some friends that I had. And I'm seeing more and more of the guys that I get to have a conversation with. These guys are leaders in industry, in the community, and yet they never got a chance to go through it as well. So one of the feedbacks I've been getting from guys is going, well, it's great that we're going to do this for our kids, but some of these men that are 32 years old going, hey, what about me? So that might be something I might reach out to you and say, hey, how do we do this? Some of these guys that, didn't grow up with dads or miss some of these things that they want to make sure that they experience as well, just that passing on of the blessing and just letting them know, as John Eldridge talks about, you've got what it takes, and be able to speak those words into their life. So one of the key questions, and actually got this from Stephen and Stacy, was we either prepare the path for the child or we prepare the child for the path. Talk to me a little bit about how you've done that, and maybe there have been different phases for you, preparing the child for the path or preparing the path for the child. Talk to me a little bit about what you think about that.
Well, I think that's right. And so sometimes as fathers and mothers, of course, we're like Charlie Brown, where all they hear is just the same voice over and over again. So a number of years ago when he was growing up, I decided to recruit a few of the fathers in my community that had different skill sets. For instance, I have an ex-military pilot. He also flew for United. He was incredible with his gift of cars and changing oil and just mechanics. And so what I did was I went ahead and gave him a $50 stipend, and I asked him if he would ask my son if he would help him, and he would pay him for changing his oil or learning how to use a trimmer around the property and things like that. Well, that kind of spurred on this other book that I'm writing as well about recruiting other men. And, do you have to pay them in order for them to pay your son? But what I found is that this gentleman, for instance, started to ask Caden for his help because he gained his trust, and my son was very eager to do that. Well, he got his own job because of that. And so there's other men in the community too that were gifted, like with woodworking and things like that, helping build a fence. And so Caden now, every summer, has an opportunity to go and work with other men on my $50 stipend. Now he's making his own way. And so it costs you a little bit. Return on investment, though, has been great.
Huge. Absolutely huge. And I love that you just found some ways to, you didn't use this word, but maybe to take some gaps that we feel or some areas that we feel ignorant in and to go, instead of just putting our head in the sand, just going, no, let me find someone who can step in the gap here and help to raise my son, to teach them some skills that maybe I don't have. So I love that. One of the things I did, especially with my oldest, we did this last year, was Justin Dodge is, he's head of a law enforcement team here in the local area. And so we went out and we did some handgun, and, so we went out shooting and stuff. And so I am a complete white belt when it comes to firearms and everything else. And so I'm kind of excited because I'm working on a project right now that I'm going to take, I got a Green Beret sniper that's going to be teaching me how to shoot, and we're going to record some of that, which is going to be really cool to see what happens. And, but anyway, I want to take an area that, that I was a white belt and let my son see me learning from Justin, but also, Jacob getting to learn from him as well. So, man, what a great thing. Now, if you've listened to a couple of the podcasts, you've heard me ask this question, and you're really, now at least with your son Caden, you're he's at 18 now, but I ran across this early on and I'd shared it, but it was, by the time your child reaches age 18, you'll have spent 80% of the total time you'll ever spend with them. And then I asked the question, what are 3 things you want to teach your kids? And so I know we've even spent a lot of time talking about your son, Caden, but, even for Ellie, just, is it different, boys and girls? Is it different, preparing the path and the child for those things? Or what? So now you're in the midst of it. I mean, he's 18, your daughter's not quite, but you're right there. So what are the things you've been focused on teaching them?
Well, what I've learned very quickly is that you have to have the team approach with, my wife, Bethany. She's just been incredible about helping to teach her how to cook and to clean and all of the feminine things that they do when they're younger. And so things that I certainly didn't have a place to do. And I give my hat off to any father that's been a single father raising their daughter. I just can't imagine having to go through those puberty issues that my wife had to go through, honestly. But I think some of the takeaways that I would say at this point is you can care, but you can't carry. It has to be their journey after a while. You have to understand, James Dobson talks about it very clearly, about the guardrails leading out into a pasture. Bethany and myself, our goal is to keep those kids from banging too hard against those guardrails, but let them make their own way so that when they get out into the pasture, they have quite a bit of an understanding about how God has made them, that he loves them, and that it will always be there for them. And Philippians 4:13, they can do everything through Christ that strengthens them. And as you'd mentioned before, 80% of my time with both Caden and Ellie is gone. So now I have to look at it and say, what can they bring back to Bethany and I? And I'm really excited to see that as their lives continue on.
I love that. And not to paint you in a corner on this, but you mentioned the guardrails, and so I have some ideas of what some guardrails would be, and I'll let you pick one, or if you have a different one. I mean, it could be everything from the guardrails of drugs and alcohol, sex, education, how we handle money, relationships. On those, are there some guardrails that you go, hey, these are essential guardrails that every dad, and this is not a conversation that you start having, or for me, I'm going, this is not a conversation you start having once they turn 13. This is, for me, I imagine, conversations that you started long, long before that, if you could. And more importantly, you demonstrated for your kids so that they could see, how you were living in the guardrails that you had in place. Have there been some specific guardrails that you've had, conversations about?
Well, I think Beth and I both realized the small story that you hear, the little kid's story about, be careful, little eyes, what you see, what you hear. So we are always on a spotlight. And I think that holds true in business as well. But with our families, we realize that if the kids are seeing us judge another person, another couple, or we're doing things that aren't following the Lord, they're going to basically take that manifestation and get it into their own lives. So one of the guardrails that both Beth and I looked at is, as we've learned, it's easy to talk about what we're displeased with. But we also understand now that maybe we should shelter that and hold off on that and do that privately as opposed to with them in front. I think right now for me, I'm trying to be that Barnabas, that encourager, as opposed to somebody that is always in a negative light. And it's easy to nitpick on anybody. We all have faults and we all have sins, and we're the greatest critic, right? But I think the reality is that our kids are looked to us for things that are right and wrong.
Yeah. I think that it's so funny you say that, because I just made a note of it, because one of my mentors, a great friend of mine, actually he just turned 60, and it's so funny because I don't think of Mark Marchesani as an old man at all, but and he's not. He's been a great friend, a mentor, a coach, a brother. I mean, we've laughed together, we've cried together, we've actually yelled at one another. It's so funny, but he shared this with me long ago. He said, a behavior favorably recognized is often repeated. And so just hearing you say that, instead of nitpicking the small things that, or the wrong things, catching them doing the right thing and then praising them, it kind of goes back to even when you were talking before about Bethany challenging you with a gratitude journal. I know this is a little bit before we started talking before, but, sharing with our kids what it is that we love. I stole this from Andy Stanley, and I as soon as I heard it, I immediately implemented it with our family, which was the worst thing you could do in our family is lie. And so we just really put it as a bedrock to in our family that, we're going to tell the truth, even, we're going to be honest with one another. And so for years, probably a couple of years, I was, hey, so boys, what's the worst thing you do? Lie. Okay. And so then finally I was like, maybe we should talk about what the best thing we could do. So then we started talking about what the best thing was. And then we actually came up with it together as a family, which was to love. And so then the real question was, is this behavior, is this response, is this attitude, is this guardrail, is this out of love? Is this demonstrating love between us? So
that's great. I love that.
Well, man, let's take a few minutes because I would be greatly upset if I forgot to talk about the book. And so let's talk about your book. Being a dad who resisted for a few years coaching my son. Now having coached him, 3 years, getting ready to have our last year together. This 8th grade year is really the last year until he's going to high school after that. When you told me about, I don't know, it just it got me. And so I have not, I want to make sure that I cherish the moments and I'm there. And I know I'm going to get opportunity to coach my younger son here coming up, even this year and kind of moving forward as well. But talk to us a little bit about the book and what's going on with that. So.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to pick up where you left off, the 8th grade year. Generally, in baseball, I'm using that as an example because that's what the book is really focused on, is coaching in the baseball realm. So between 8th grade and 9th grade year, there's a big transition. Some major drop-offs where kids don't go on any further, and then the others, they go on to competitive baseball. And then a whole new coaching staff kind of takes over. It's kind of like from college to pro. Yeah. And I remember specifically when I was in 8th grade, going on to my freshman year, I made a competitive baseball team. My dad had been coaching me since I was 5 years old. And I remember playing third base, getting ready for that first game, shagging some balls, getting ready. I look over to the right, and there he was against the fence, looking out at me. His hands were basically curled on the length of the fence. He didn't say much at all, and I just remember thinking to myself, my dad may never coach me again. Mm-hmm. At that point, at 13, 14 years old, you're not maybe as emotionally tied. That happened to me, of course, 6 years ago when my son all of a sudden made a Slammers team here in Centennial. And I remember walking up to the coach and I said, hey, I have a lot of baseball experience. I've been the head coach, assistant coach for many years. Can I offer my assistance? Can I throw some BP? Can I hit some ground balls? Maybe even coach first base for you. Whatever you need, I'll do it. And I remember him specifically looking at me and saying, you know what? We get paid now as coaches, and we could use help on raising funds for these kids to go to their different events and even out of state. And we could certainly use your help on gathering snacks for the kids for after the games. And I remember walking away with my tail between my legs thinking, wow, that's my last time I think I'm ever going to coach again as well. And you go from being on the inside of the fence where you're part of the team, where you're hearing the chatter and just the smell of the grass and the dirt on your shoes, and you're around your own son, and all of a sudden now you're on the outside. You're on the outside of the fence, and that's the name of the book, The Outside of the Fence, where you have to kind of take your role from being a coach, somebody that your son is always looking at, to somebody that is now a Barnabas, an encourager. And so the role took me quite a few years, actually, to the point now where his senior year, he's got his own thing going. College awaits him. Whether or not he plays through college or not, that's up to him completely. But I felt like the book needs to be told, the story needs to be told. I have about 12 vignettes from different dads that have poured their heart and soul, and many of them had said how emotional it has been for them to write their own story. Some of them, for instance, one gentleman was a 4-time state catcher in high school. It wouldn't matter if he went 4 for 4 and threw 2 batters out at second base. His dad would always berate him after the game.
Yeah.
And for him to write the story was very emotional. Whereas you have others that were like, this was the best thing. I remember my dad always being there for me. We would talk for endless hours after the game. And then like my son and I, he knew that he didn't want to be talked to after the game. We would drive home in silence. And then when he felt like he was ready to talk to me about the game itself and maybe some things he did well or maybe didn't do well, I realized that I had to let him make that choice.
I love that. I mean, I'm just trying to imagine, because I'm 1 year away, but then, I got my little guy. I coach him in flag, and I'm going to get to coach him in tackle coming up. Just the emotions, that I'm feeling. I mean, I feel emotional just thinking about that, with you, and just imagining, here it is. We can all remember the last time, whether you played in high school or college or whatever, the last time you got to put on the uniform, for yourself. And even for me, that I coached the high school level, and so I can remember some of those final days of coaching and some of that. But then it's a whole different level that I've been able to step down and coach my boys in that relationship and everything as well. So, can you give us one little story, for yourself, just, as you've been, navigating that season? Now, it's been a few years since then, but, how's it been for you?
Yeah. So I think the first thing for me is, dressing up together. When you're at a certain level, right, you dress in a uniform.
Right.
And not having to put the uniform back on again, letting him dress himself, where I'm just in my normal street clothes again, was probably the most challenging for me. So, in my own closet, I have a few different jerseys that are still hanging up there that have no father inside of them at this point. And so that's one thing that really kind of caught me. I think the second that I would say more than anything is knowing that after the game, how you would go over to right or left field, depending on the dugout, to kind of do your team huddle, to talk about the game, hopefully encourage each other, even win or lose. Whereas for me, I would be on the outside of the fence, hoping to be in that little huddle, but knowing that would never come back.
How has Bethany dealt with all that?
Oh, I think for her, there's been a lot of, hey, look and step back. This is his journey, because I would go up to him on the outside of the fence when he would get up to the batter circle, and I would say, now look, he's throwing fastballs or they're sliding away from you, and he would like, Dad, I got it. And my wife would have to kind of gently pull me back, and now I just let him make his own way. Oftentimes he's generally a right fielder right now, so I'll go to the right field fence and just be there. I won't say a word. If he makes a great play, I'll encourage him. But, I'm not saying and coaching him from the outside of the fence. I'm letting his coaches that are currently there do all the coaching. Wow.
I mean, it sounds easy to say, but it's got to be at times, it's got to be tough to walk out as well. So, I mean, I love just the way that you have, and it seems like so graciously and elegantly been able to walk your son in particular, through this journey, and even walk yourself through the journey as well, because it's one thing to let him, you mentioned you can either care or carry them, it's one thing for you to care for them and go through that. But you also got to remember your feelings count too. And how it feels to be, on the outside of the fence. Hey, if guys want to get a copy of this book, which I'm sure they will, where can they find it? Is it out yet?
At this point, I have a ghostwriter that's helping me finish the final product, and we'll be publishing it. So that'll be coming soon, but I will let you know.
Great. That is wonderful. And we'll make sure we get details out for everybody with it. One of the experiences that I was reminded of, and took advantage of, this last week. We'll talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, with the coronavirus and all the scare and, people being stuck inside and everything. Is that when Gretchen and I first met, we worked at a group home for troubled teens. So it was kids who were finishing their juvenile sentence, and amazing program. And one of the strategies, because it was a high intensity environment, and it was not unusual for kids to be yelling at staff or anything else, and we had a really unique family relationship that was there, because it was about a 2-to-1 ratio between residents, the kids and the staff. And but one of the things that we would do on a very regular basis is that when a situation got, out of hand and we needed to have some time with the kid in particular, was we walked the block is what it was. We were literally just the two of us, staff and a kid, and we would walk the block and we would talk, and it wasn't a time to lecture or anything else. And for whatever reason, man, I was reminded of this last week. And so I grabbed my son Jacob just the other day, and so we literally just walked the block. And I went out with one intention and one intention only, is just to be with him and just to let whatever comes up come up and let him talk wherever he is. And it was funny because he's very articulate, and he has really he's grown into seeking me so much more now in his early adolescence. But I saw the value of just that time, that, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and where he was able to control the conversation, tell the stories he wanted to tell, and without me coming over the top or dominating the conversation or, prying into whatever. And he actually expressed to me after just how much he really enjoyed it. And then he was asking me, when can we walk the block again? And I just want to share that, because I think, so many times we're looking for strategies or techniques or whatever, or what do I say, or how do I handle this? And sometimes it's just being present. And, in the midst of all this stuff that's going on in this pandemic, and we're given a great opportunity to have far more time at home with our family. And so we can focus on the fears and the concerns and the doubts, and obviously take care of all the things that we need to, but we're going to get a time to be creative with our family and just to be present and to share stories, or to, walk the block, or, whatever it may be. And so I just would encourage everybody during this time right now, this is a time not to, hide and be fearful and to hoard or anything, but to open up and to share and to tell stories and to talk about the guardrails, to talk about, even the concerns, that you have, or where things are going, or goals or dreams, or, all those different areas that we can do right now when we're given this gift of time that so much, we lose because of jobs or other things that are going on. So.
Well, I think you've hit some great points. I think Walk the Block, what a great story. What a great title for a book.
Yeah.
But also, as you had mentioned, this is the time for us to reunite with each other, with our community. Even if you can't get with them face to face, the relationships that might be broken or strained, or maybe just haven't talked to, what a great opportunity to let people know that you love them.
I love that, man. JT, thank you so much, man. This has been a long time coming. And when I caught you in the gym the other day, you're like, just shoot me a text. And I was like, you got to be honest. I was like, I don't know, is he politely blowing me off? I don't care. I'm going to try anyway. And then you responded right away. So I thank you so much.
I'm honored.
Man.
Absolutely. You're doing a great thing here, Kevin. Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate it. Hey, if people do want to connect with you, is there a way for people to connect with you or something?
Yeah, just my email is docjtanderson@msn.com. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to hear your story as well.
Well, love it. And if people want to come, maybe get a little, see you from a professional standpoint, chiropractic standpoint, give us your business.
Yeah, the website is just gocjt.com.
Okay, love it. And I would encourage you to go there and to check out JT. And I love that you take such a holistic approach to it as well. When you were talking about just not only the physical part, but the one thing I was hoping we would talk about, we'll talk about later, but is the emotional part as well, and the mental part of just being, healthy and whole and vibrant. So thank you, guys. Hey, guys, I want to encourage you just to have a great week, be a badass dad, and have a badass week. And we are out. Hey guys, I want to thank you guys again just for listening to this episode of Badass Dads. Hey, if you found this episode helpful, if it's beneficial, if it's shareable, man, we'd love for you to pass it on to someone. Previous episodes you can check out on our podcast page, on iTunes, on Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, check out our website, BADAD.org. That's BADAD.org. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram pages. So please, love the support. Check all that out. Let's get this movement going. And we are committed to forging stronger fathers. Be a part of the movement. We're out.